Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Sandy, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics. I'm joined by a group of colleagues, my two co-hosts, Cris. Cris is the deputy chief economist, and Ryan Sweet. Ryan is the director of real-time economics. And then we've got Marisa DiNatale, and Dante DeAntonio, our two job market mavens. Because you guys both came from the BLS, right? One point or another. Now, I think we established that you guys did not overlap.
Right.
No, they're shaking their heads. No,
we did not overlap.
We did not overlap. And Marisa, you worked on what was the report you worked on when you were there?
Well, I worked on the household survey side.
Oh, that's right.
The CPS, but the people in that office write the jobs report.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So you were focused on that household employment survey,
right,
which is the basis for the unemployment rate, participation rate, that kind of thing, which we'll definitely come back to. And Dante, you were focused on regional, I believe, employment.
Yeah, so it's payroll survey, but state metro employment. Yeah,
state metro employment. So we've got some real expertise here. You got to make up for Ryan's deficiencies. So I'm not sure about Ryan's.
What are we? 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
I'm just going to point out your forecast for the job gain this month was pretty
awful.
Bad. I thought.
Maverick. You had the same forecast.
I know. It's true.
Yeah, it was really
forecast. Bad. 225K. Yeah.
But I went back. I made an amateur mistake.
Oh, okay. I want to hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because my mistakes are always professional, but I'd love to hear the. But anyway, we're obviously talking about the July employment number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we need a rundown. So, Marisa, you want to lead the way here? You want to give us the report?
Yeah. So you guys were only about 300,000 off.
I'll remember this.
The net increase in payrolls in July was 528,000. Huge, very surprising. I mean, you weren't the only ones that are off, right? Consensus was nowhere near that as well.
I think it was 250, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the highest forecast was around 300. So this was way out of.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Boy, so you're not alone.
The distribution was very narrow on the forecast.
I think the range, I could be off by a little bit. I think it went from 40 to 350.
Wow. Okay, interesting.
And then, so 528,000 in July. And then if you look at May and June revisions, added another 28,000 to payrolls. Both May and June were revised higher. The job gains were very broad-based. We got a huge increase in leisure hospitality employment. I'll say that the BLS, in writing up their news release, makes it a point to say we're now back above where we were in February of 2020 in terms of payroll employment. And that's true of most industries. There's only a couple of industries now where payrolls are below where they were prior to the pandemic. So that's leisure hospitality, education, healthcare, state and local government, and I think wholesale trade might be below as well, but everything else is back above where it was. So in that respect, the labor market is kind of back to normal. The unemployment rate fell.
Would you consider that normal though? I mean, in the sense that if there had been no pandemic, what would employment be higher? Presumably higher, right?
Yeah. A lot higher.
Like how much higher do you think?
Well, if you think of what average job growth pre-pandemic was 150, 200,000 per month. So that adds up pretty quickly.
Although that probably would have slowed, right? Because we were at full employment, given labor force, probably been 100K maybe.
Yeah, so 100.
Okay. So you're saying maybe 2.5 million more jobs, something like that.
Correct.
So the pandemic is still weighing on the labor market. Yeah. Okay.
We're back to where we were. Right. We're back to where we were. The unemployment rate fell to 3.5%. So, and that is where we were when we went into the recession induced by the pandemic. It was 3.5% in February and in January of 2020. And The labor force participation rate actually didn't really change. It ticked up by 1/10 of a percentage point. It
Oh,
looks like
Did it tick up? I thought it ticked down.
by 1/10 of a percentage point.
Tick down.
I thought it was up.
See, you have all these problems with negative, positive
Oh,
signs.
here we go.
Yeah, it's like, here we go again. Yeah, like what the
I
heck?
think it
Really?
fell. I think
It
it fell.
fell. Yeah,
It
it fell. 62 point, right? Dante. Did it
I believe
fall?
it goes down by 1/10. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see what else. Average hourly earnings were up 0.4% over the
Are you
month.
sure? Are you sure they were up?
No, I'm just making things up.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're right. They were definitely up. Yeah.
Yeah, and the year-over-year growth rate, though, in average hourly earnings has come down a bit. I mean, it's actually accelerated month on month, but on the year, it's decelerated a bit over the past few months. So we are seeing real negative wage growth for most workers.
I think the year over year is 5.2%. Is that right, Ryan? Do you know?
5.1 or 5.2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it feels like at least in terms of average hourly earnings, and I think I'd go so far as to say all the wage statistics, they're, obviously not exactly the same, but they're all coalescing around the 5%-ish kind of wage growth. Would that sound about right to you?
If you look at ECI too, and other, yeah.
Employment cost index and
right.
The plethora of data. Okay. And what would you say? My sense is we want wage growth to be consistent with 2% inflation, which is the Fed's target, where the Fed wants inflation to go appropriately. So that would be consistent with wage growth of what would you say? Something 3.5%, 4%, something like that. That would be 2% inflation plus 1.5%, 2% productivity growth, something like that. Okay. I'm asking you, Marisa. Is that?
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you said Ryan. 3.5%. Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of the payroll survey, like I said, it was pretty broad-based. The diffusion index was high, indicating that job gains are broad-based across industries. I was looking at some of the industry detail. If you look at the job gains across industries, really don't see many negative numbers. Some in manufacturing, notably motor vehicles, lost jobs over the month. But other than that, there weren't any major, big industries that actually lost jobs over the month. It was mostly gains everywhere.
Right.
What else? It's a really good report. It's hard to find anything that's bad in this, really.
Except for maybe the step back in participation, I guess, right? That would be the only sort of blemish.
Yeah, but I wouldn't read much into a 1/10 percentage point move in either direction. I mean, it's not even in their statistical significance of movements in that statistic. So, so whether it's up 1/10 or down 1/10, it's really all the same.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. So a good, well, depends on your perspective. I mean, looking at it from a prism of growth, this unabashedly good report. Looking at it from the prism of the Fed's prism, wage and price pressures, maybe not so much. They probably would have some issue with this or some concern with it, but we'll come back to that. Okay, Dante, you want to fill any gaps in there? Anything you want to highlight? Anything that you think is important that we should focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 1 month move in participation doesn't matter so much, but there certainly looks like there's a trend forming in the wrong direction, where over the last 3 or 4 months, it's continued to sort of tick a little bit lower. It's primarily driven by older workers. I think there was a little bit of step back in young workers this month as well. Prime age seems to be holding up pretty good, which is the most important piece, but certainly I think older workers and increased share of retirements is going to be an issue at some point if we continue to add jobs like this. Participation is going to matter more and more. And I think that older cohort of workers that have retired at higher rates over the last 2 years at some point is going to come into play in terms of availability of workers. So that's one thing. And then I still think it's seasonal adjustment.
Before you move on the labor force participation point. So what you're saying is, yeah, 1 month down, no big deal, but it feels like it's slumping here a little bit. The participation rate caved when the pandemic hit, came back when the economy reopened, never got fully back, and now feels like it's slumping a little bit. And that's a bit of a concern because we have labor force participation generally remains relatively low, certainly compared to pre-pandemic. Can I ask you about that though? If you look at projections for the labor force participation rate pre-pandemic, look at our projections, look at projections from the Congressional Budget Office. Projections were for lower participation throughout this period, just given the aging out of the baby boom generation from the workforce. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the participation rate today is almost exactly where the CBO said it was going to be, pre-pandemic. Does that make sense to you? Does that cushion the blow here in terms of your thinking as to what it means?
I think it certainly cushions the blow a bit, right? I mean, we weren't expecting participation rates to, they had sort of spiked right before the pandemic in late 2019, and that trend certainly wasn't expected to continue. So I think that does make it a little bit of a softer impact. If you look at our forecast just for the size of the labor force back at the end of 2019 relative to where we are now, there's still like about a 3 million gap, I think, between sort of where we thought the labor force would be in terms of total size versus where we are today. So certainly we're still missing some segment of the workforce that we thought would be there absent the pandemic. I think that is right. We weren't expecting growth to continue at the rates we saw in 2015 to 2019, but even if it had grown at slower rates, absent the pandemic, we'd have a bigger labor force today. There'd be more older workers in the labor force still. It would probably take some of that pressure off of wages that we're seeing sort of persist. So I think from the Fed's perspective, in terms of wage and price pressures, that the labor force issue is big because it's going to keep those wage pressures higher for longer, I think, than they would be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think though the thing that's a bit surprising isn't that labor force participation is as low as it is, because that feels like that was going to happen more or less even without the pandemic. What is different though is working age population growth. That really got crushed during the pandemic and has rebounded a little bit. But if you look at that, it's only a little bit above today's working age population is only a little bit above what it was pre-pandemic. And that goes to, I think, largely immigration. We just had so many fewer immigrants come into the country, certainly leading up to the pandemic because of change in immigration law under President Trump, but the pandemic just crushed the immigration, and which is, key to the labor force. So you agree with that? Or
yeah, I think, certainly thinking about long-term growth potential, especially, immigration, if it doesn't ever come back to what it was before, as natural population growth keeps slowing, which, almost certainly will, immigration would be a bigger and bigger piece of potential labor force growth moving forward. So it's a critical piece to watch out for, I think, over the next few years.
Got it. Hey, Ryan, anything you want to add to the rundown on the employment report?
I think something that I found very encouraging is the drop in long-term unemployed. So the number of people that are unemployed for 27 weeks or longer, that fell more than 250,000 and is now lower than it was pre-pandemic. So, there's concerns about long-term scarring effects of the pandemic on unemployed, like structurally higher unemployment, doesn't seem to be, coming to fruition. So I thought that was very encouraging.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that. That's very interesting. Was that a in the month, or is that a trend that you've been observing in the data?
Oh, it's been steadily declining, but there was a
yeah.
big drop in July, and that put us back down lower than we were pre-pandemic. So the other thing I noticed was the number of people that were employed but not at work because of own illness, that ticked up in July. I think that's COVID related, but
Say that again. What was
the
that?
number of people that are employed but not at work because of an illness, that rose in July. Not a lot, but it ticked up, and it's still, elevated. So I think, the pandemic is still having an effect on the labor market.
Could that be part of the labor force participation issue?
It could be. I mean, there's some discussion that maybe long COVID is having an effect on the participation rate, which, we have to dig into and see if there's any evidence of that. But, there's lots of reasons why the participation rate is not going anywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's bounced around, right? I mean, it
yeah.
didn't look like it was an unusual spike in July.
Like
And-
the number of people out sick.
Yeah,
Oh no, it wasn't an unusual. It was just, I thought hopefully the trend was going to keep going down, but
Yeah.
we're kind of bouncing back up.
although if you look at the supplemental questions about COVID, the
Mhm.
number of people who said that they were working from home because of COVID fell to the lowest it's been since the start of the pandemic. And that's even with cases quite high in the US, right?
Mhm.
And I don't put I think we've talked about this before, I don't put a ton of stock in that particular question, but just directionally in the magnitude of it, the fact that it's reached a post-pandemic low, I think is significant, just in terms of how people are coping with COVID differently now than they were maybe a year ago.
Yeah, it's definitely less disruptive because of the quarantine
Yeah.
period has been slash in half. But one thing I'm worried about is monkeypox, because the quarantine period is 2 to 4 weeks. So if these cases really start to increase, that could be very, very disruptive to the job market.
Hey, Marisa, the number of people that said they were not working because of COVID, was that the 548,000, 550,000 people? Is that the number?
No. This is the number of, what I was referring to was the people who said they were working from home because of the pandemic, teleworking.
The
And that was
telework.
like 11 million people or
I see.
something like that. It was 7% of employed.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's another COVID related statistic, and the number of people saying that they're not in the labor force because of COVID is now 548, 550,000, something
That's
like
right.
that.
There's another number.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure what it was, but you're right.
So
That's
COVID's still playing a
people.
role. That's still a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So COVID's still playing a role. I mean, a meaningful role, but it's just, you're saying it's becoming less significant as we.
And I think it's just becoming less disruptive. I think, some people are working from home. Other people are kind of going about their business pretty quickly after a diagnosis. So it's a different world than we were in a year ago if you got COVID, right? I think it was far more disruptive a year ago to the labor force.
So here's how I think about it. So as you point out, payroll employment is now back to its pre-pandemic peak, a little bit above 30,000 above.
Yeah.
If not for the pandemic, I think it would be fair to say that employment would probably be about 2.5 million jobs higher than it is today. That's 100K per month, sort of on average, something like that. Of that 2.5 million that were kind of, let's call them missing, I'd say 3/4 of that is, and this is kind of in my mind, I'm laying it out and like to hear what you think, but 3.5, about 3/4 of that is related to the decline in working age population growth relative to what it would have been because of the hit to immigration. And that's largely policy and the pandemic. And then the other fourth is still related to COVID, people, not working because of COVID for some reason, long COVID, fear of getting sick, fear of making their elderly parent sick or their kid sick or whatever it may be. Also a little bit in there of the 2.5 million are, people who don't need 2 or 3 jobs, at least up to this point in time. They sheltered in place, save money, or they got government support, save money. and it's allowed them to be a little bit more leisurely in terms of taking a second or third job that they needed to have before the pandemic. So that goes to, the fact that we've seen much fewer part-time jobs out there compared to full-time jobs. Does that characterization sound right to you, or, roughly right, or would you have a different kind of frame? And I'm kind of throwing it out to the group if anyone's got an opinion about that. Does that sound about right? Good framework?
I think so.
It does. I noted that there's the 55 plus crowd is the demographic that has stepped out at a higher rate and hasn't really come back in. So whether that's directly related to COVID or indirectly related to COVID because of the savings they may have been able to build up, I'm not sure. But I think that's a wild card, right? Will that group stay permanently out, or are they going to come back in at some point?
Right.
Especially given what equity markets have been doing recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if
right.
my frame is right, then we're never going to get all those jobs back, right? I mean,
right.
We're not going to have immigration above what it would have been otherwise for an extended period. It doesn't feel like that's
unlikely.
Unlikely. We might get those the COVID related work folks that have been affected by COVID back in, but that could take a long time to come back in, and who knows. So we may get partway back those 2.5 million that were down, but it doesn't feel like we're going to get most of those back. It feels like we're going to. When we look back 5-10 years from now and graph employment and look at the level of employment, you're going to see a shift down in employment. We're not going to get all that back.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't feel like. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Cris, I didn't ask you anything else in the jobs report you wanted to call out. Were you as equally surprised? I don't know what your forecast was for this.
I was on the higher end, but not 500K. Right?
Yeah, right.
So I was higher than consensus, but didn't expect this. So yeah, I think the report was stunning, to use one word. It was well above expectations here, and really, I think Marisa made the point. Really hard to find any real sign of weakness in any sector, in any industry, any demographic. Look across education, gender, age. Strong across the board. That's a hint for the statistics game. I really had to dig to find something. But yeah, I think it's a strong report. Good for the house, good for households, good for the overall economy. Not so great for my productivity forecast, right? This the strength in labor market, given the weakness in GDP, really points to weakening productivity growth. And
you've been a productivity bull.
I'm a technology evangelist, so
yeah,
doesn't point in that direction.
Yeah, we'll come back to that because we've got Dante on too, and he's the productivity skeptic. So
I know
we should talk about that a little bit. Before we go there, I do want to talk about what this means for this whole debate around: have we been in recession? Are we in recession? Have we been in recession? This feels like this.
Obviously not.
Obviously not. Obviously not. Right.
Yeah, you can't even bring up. You can't even use the R word anymore.
Right.
And doesn't matter.
It's a tiresome debate.
It is. I think it's a sideshow kind of debate. I mean, it's sort of semantics. It's like if you're a household and how are you doing? Do you have jobs? Are you getting raises? Is inflation eating into your spending, which it probably is, right? I mean, there's a lot of households that are hurting just because of gas prices and elevated prices across the board. It probably doesn't feel great. So I just think whether or not we label anything a recession is sort of, at this point, that's not the discussion that people should be focusing on. I mean, we can't be in a recession when the unemployment rate is falling and it's 3.5%, which is about as low as it's almost ever been. And we're adding 500,000 jobs a month. I mean, that's not a recession.
That's not
at all.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, well, what are the things that are wrong in the economy and how can those be addressed? And that's the discussion I think that we should be having.
More productive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's inflation.
Yes.
At least the most immediate problem.
Yes,
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 absolutely.
absolutely.
Right. Okay. Dante, would you take exception? I know you'd like to take the other side of these kinds of arguments. You do it with me all the time.
I mean, I have a few reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical of how strong the jobs report was. Yeah, I think there's reasons to believe that it's pretty overstating pretty strongly sort of how many
Oh.
jobs added. I don't, maybe after the game I'll get into a little more detail, but I think I have probably three reasons why I think maybe, this doesn't tell us the whole story in terms of how strong the job market is.
Oh,
Well, so
okay, what-
productivity might be stronger.
Well, I don't know if
Like
it's enough to flip the productivity script, but I think certainly I don't know that 500K is the real number this month. I think we're doing fine. The job market is fine, but yeah, I think we're certainly probably overstating the case this month in terms of how strong it really is.
Well, you teased us 3 reasons. Are you saying we should wait to the game before we get the 3 reasons? Is that?
Yeah, I'm going to give away one of my reasons if I do it.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll wait then to hear the 3 reasons why it's not as strong as it appears. Okay. Okay. So let's just put that to bed. We're not in recession. We have not experienced recession in the first half of the year. How is that possible with falling unemployment and booming job growth? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that would be the case. Okay. All right. So then let's go to the question you brought up a minute ago, and that is productivity. So kind of at face value, you got GDP declining. GDP fell in the first half of the year, 2 quarters of consecutive decline. That's the value of all the things that we produce. That's output. And then jobs are booming. Hours worked are booming. So, one divided by the other, which is productivity, that feels like it says productivity is declining. So, Cris, how do you square this circle? Given your thinking that you're a productivity bull, that your technological innovation is going to drive very strong productivity growth going forward. Are you giving up on that view, or what? How are you squaring this circle?
Not giving up long term, certainly. I think there's some noise in the data here first. So that's always the economist explanation, right? Number one, if the data doesn't match your theory, the data must be wrong. So, but I think there's some legitimacy, right? We've been talking ad nauseum about the GDP report and issues in terms of measurement. High probability things get restated, so it's probably not as dire as what those numbers suggested. But even if first and second quarter don't change, third and fourth quarter I think still look pretty good. So there could be some blips here, but if you smooth it all out, GDP probably is still in a relatively fine shape. So the other point to make is that clearly there are business cycles, right? So productivity may not go up with a straight line. All right, there's going to be some ebbs and flows, but generally speaking, I still believe that remote work, all the technological innovations we've adopted over the last couple of years, they are going to pay some benefits in the longer run. They might not be as strong as 2% type of growth, but still, I think we'll get reasonably high or higher than pre-pandemic levels of productivity growth going forward.
So just to frame this, and then I'm going to turn to you, Dante, in a second.
Yeah.
Since World War II, productivity growth, I believe non-farm business productivity growth is almost 2% per annum on the nose.
Right.
In the at the apex of the slowdown in productivity growth back in the mid part of the last decade, 2015, 2016, kind of in the wake of the deleveraging from the financial crisis, we were at 1%. It felt like we were at 1%, give or take. What do you think underlying productivity growth is now? Underlying meaning abstracting from the vagaries of the data, the quarter-to-quarter movements, even the effects of business cycles, getting under the underlying trend. What do you think it is now?
So between 1.5 and 2, probably.
Okay.
Point estimate, I would say probably 1 3/4.
Okay.
Right, so
And
that's my bullishness.
And that's your forecast for where it would be for this foreseeable future.
Long run, yeah.
That's your that's where we are, 1 3/4, which by the way, I think before the pandemic hit, it felt like we had seen that come up to.
We were moving in that direction. Yeah.
We're definitely moving in that direction. Okay. And you think that's where we are, somewhere 1.5%, 2%. If I had to pick a number, if you had to pick a number, which you do,
Yeah.
for a forecast, 1.75%. Okay.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, going back to wage growth, that would imply that the kind of the sustainable amount of wage growth consistent with the 2% inflation would be 3.75%, right? That would be
Right.
2% inflation plus 1.75%. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on here on the margin, but that's roughly the case, somewhere between 3.5% and 4% on.
That's right.
Okay. And you point to remote work. One other thing I would, and I'm helping you build your case against Dante here, because I can feel Dante is really going to come at us pretty hard here. But the other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, and Ryan, you probably know this data better than I, feels like businesses are investing very aggressively in labor-saving technologies, with software and equipment, intellectual property, and that probably goes to the fact that they realize that labor is going to be a problem. It's going to be a shortage because of the demographic trends we've been talking about, aging out of the boomers, immigration flows, that kind of thing. Is that right? Do I have that right? That investment's been strong?
It's been very strong, particularly in intellectual property. I mean, quarter after quarter, it's been growing very, very rapidly. And that leads productivity growth by a couple of years. So we'll start to see the fruits of those investments over the next couple of years.
Oh, so you're a productivity bull as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with Cris.
Oh, you're with Cris. Where are you on this, Marisa? We're trying to isolate Dante here. Don't worry, Dante. We're coming back to you in just a second. Where do you stand on this, Marisa?
I'm maybe not as optimistic as Cris and Ryan are, but I do think there's some evidence that over the past few years we've invested quite a bit in labor-saving technology. The remote work thing, I don't know that in and of itself is a huge long-term boon to productivity growth. I think it's more of the other sorts of technological investments that companies have made in the last couple of years. I think the jury is still out on whether remote work by itself is productivity enhancing.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. On that point, though, and of course the jury is out. We need data points. But did you see there was this really cool study that Nick Bloom, the Stanford professor who's kind of been out on this issue, looking at the productivity of engineers, and they have this controlled experiment within a company, folks that are working remotely and folks that are working in the office. And they, for these kinds of coders, programmers, they can actually see how much line of code they're actually writing, every day.
Yeah.
And they found that the folks that are remote work actually written 8% more code than the folks that were working in the office. Did you see that study? I thought it was pretty cool.
That sort of doesn't surprise me in that sort of job. I wonder what that looks like economy wide with other people who are working remotely that maybe need do more collaborative work or group work or something where there's more face-to-face that's part of their job, So
let me ask you, has your productivity growth improved? You're remote.
Well, I've always been remote. So
how's your productivity growth going?
So I would say that it's improved since the pandemic because everyone else is now remote.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Well,
there you go.
I mean, that's been an enormous change, right? Because I've been remote for 7 years, but I was sort of one person isolated who was remote, and you guys were all together in an office, and meetings would be very challenging because you'd all be sitting around a table together. You know how that goes. There's a lot of crosstalk. You forget that somebody's on the phone. The person on the phone has a hard time getting into the conversation. Now that everyone is remote, it's like a whole new world for me. I mean,
we were dragging you down.
You were dragging me down. Yeah, you really were. And now it's great because now I can have fruitful discussions and conversations with people face to face. So the fact that everyone is like this,
that sounds like an argument for why it could be a big deal as becomes you hit critical mass, right? Technology improves,
Yeah, it
also
could
the other
be.
thing I wonder about is, as companies form now, it doesn't feel like they're going to optimize around a cube in an office building. It feels like they're going to optimize around remote work.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different, you go to a whole different level of potential productivity gains because you're building from ground zero around the remote work dynamic, as opposed to like us, we're kind of gerrymandering into remote work because that's not what we did, pre-pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I still think it's an interesting question about the cultural sorts of transfers, the innovation, the sort of like water cooler conversations you have with people that are spontaneous, that might spark new ideas when you're in an office and you're face to face. I don't do much spontaneous Zooming of people just to chat, right? Whereas in an office, you do that sort of thing, and sometimes that generates ideas or collaborations that you might not be getting at home. These are all completely open questions. I'm not even arguing that that's not happening.
Yeah.
Maybe it is, but I think it's going to take a while until we know what the real impact of that kind of, even if you're forming a business, right? I mean, that to me seems like something that really being in person, and I mean, Mark, I'm being in person and being able to.
I never really liked being in person with my brother. I'm just saying, much better over Zoom.
Because you can hang up on him.
Yeah. No, I never hang up on him. He hangs up on me. Yeah. Yeah. No, good point though. All good points. So Dante.
It's interesting.
Oh, sorry. Chris, go ahead.
One quick point here. So I think these are all great points. I think there are some open questions here. My assumption really is just predicated on the better matching of the labor market itself. I think that alone already gives you some productivity.
That's a good point.
You're tapping into a national, maybe even international labor market now versus something that's more regional, and that has to produce some better quality matches. So.
That's a great point. Yeah. Okay, Dante. So what do you think of this? I kind of sort of cut you out here, isolated you off in this little corner over here. So fight your way out. So, of course, the data's on your side. Just
yeah, so far. One, before I get into my main argument, quick counterpoint to Chris's argument about better matching is, I think the jury's still out in terms of what the impact of remote work will have on turnover. I think if more remote work leads to persistently higher levels of turnover because people find it easier to switch jobs, I think that ultimately hurts firm level productivity if you have higher rates of turnover than you had pre-pandemic. So that just one small point. I don't think that's a major factor here. In my mind, the two big competing forces here are technology, sort of broadly speaking, and demographics. And Mark, you and I worked on a paper a few years back, right? We quantified the impact of demographics, specifically aging, on productivity, right? And the biggest impact of aging on productivity was in the last decade and in the next decade, right? So we're in sort of the middle of the 20-year period where the aging of the population, we think, has the biggest headwind against productivity growth, right? So I think that's my main reason why I think it's going to remain weak in the near term, right through this decade. What we've seen historically is that technological change takes a very long time to translate into much stronger productivity growth. The demographic issue is we're already in the midst of it, right? It's happening. It's going to continue to be a headwind. So if you're thinking about sort of estimates of productivity growth, I'm more pessimistic, I think, through this decade, where I think we're probably something like 1.25% instead of 1.75%, like Cris would say. I still think that might settle higher long term, once the sort of baby boomer headwind moves largely past, at the end of the decade. Maybe you settle at 1.5% longer term. But I just think the demographic issue is a bigger factor right now and will continue to be for the next couple of years at least, versus the sort of the benefit that we're getting from technological change right now.
I had forgotten about that paper. That was a classic, actually.
Right. That's why it's all.
Yeah. It's funny. That was the aging population was it has been a very significant factor weighing on productivity, and we explored kind of why would that be the case, and we had two theories. One, the wise man theory, which was my favorite, and that was when aging boomers like me retire, we take all this institutional knowledge with us, and you millennials and other generations behind us, you're left diminished by that, and it hurts productivity growth. It turns out that that's not the case. We couldn't see that at all in the data. It's more the albatross theory, and that is guys like me are holding you guys like you back, where the age ceiling over your ability to execute on new ideas and incorporate new technologies. And obviously that's key to productivity growth. And that's what we found. It's interesting though, my take on that study and what it means for productivity growth is a little different. You're right that the aging has lowered trend productivity, but productivity growth, but we're well beyond the peak impact of that. That felt like that was a few, back in the latter part of the last decade, and that weight on productivity growth is now diminishing over time, and will be the case over the next decade. And a decade from now, it basically goes away. Is that right?
Yeah, I think basically started in roughly 2010, peaked maybe roughly 2020, and it's basically like a 20-year period with the peak in the middle, and we're on the downside of that impact, I think. But I still think that impact is big enough, at least over the next couple of years, to outweigh the upside in productivity from pandemic related changes, I think.
I see. Well, I think you'll both take solace in the fact that our actual baseline forecast is for 1.5% productivity growth. So it reflects both your views, I think, quite well.
We're equally unhappy.
Pardon me?
We're equally unhappy.
Well, and that's the way as it should be. We're all unhappy. Yeah, because we don't get exactly our forecast, but it's like 1.5%. Okay, good. Let's anything else on the productivity debate that anyone wants to bring up? No? Okay. Let's turn to, so far, I think most of us have taken this report in the strong job gains as a glass half full kind of development. This is, how can this be bad? The economy is resilient. We're creating a lot of jobs. But let's talk about it in the context of the Federal Reserve and monetary policy, because that goes to the future. This feels more like a glass half empty kind of report. Would you agree, Ryan, with that perspective?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because look how the bond market reacted. Good news is bad news for the bond market now, because now they're expecting the Fed to be very aggressive again in September and possibly even in November and December. So it's kind of, the Fed wants the job market to cool off so we don't blow past full employment, which would give them even more headaches, because returning to the economy to full employment without pushing it into a recession is very, very difficult for the Fed to pull off. So yeah, I think the Fed's looking at this, and the job market's giving them cover to continue to aggressively raise interest rates. So I think, we have 50 basis points in our baseline forecast. I think depending on what the CPI does, for September, depending on what the CPI does next week, I think odds are pretty high that they go 75. So
really?
Yeah, they're going to keep pushing hard because they want to get inflation down, and I'm just afraid they're going to overdo it.
Okay. Well, I think their number one priority is inflation. So we get as you say, a consumer price index report, CPI report for the month of July on next Wednesday. And of course, the June CPI report was a disaster. Big increases. Of course, gasoline prices peaked back in June. Correct. And we had 9.1%, I believe, year-over-year CPI inflation of 40-year high. Can you give us a sense? I know this is early and you have a lot of work to do to give you, and you're really good at this, to give us a sense of CPI, but can you give us an advanced preview? Because gasoline prices have come way in, diesel prices have come down, jet fuel prices have come down, the whole energy price structure has come in between June and July. We should get I think a much better number, but what do you think? What is CPI looking like for
gasoline alone? So the CPI for gasoline should shave 0.5 point off month over month growth in the CPI. So we're looking at a very small increase. Right now I have like 0.2.
Oh, okay.
Increase month over month for the headline CPI. What I think is going to be interesting is the core CPI is going to come in hot. So that core CPI excludes food and energy, and that should be up 0.5 point to 0.6 right now.
Really?
So that's what the Fed's going to cling to.
Why do you say that? What are you looking at that would give you that kind of a number? 0.5, 0.6 on core CPI.
Oh, if you look at apparel prices, if you look at new and used car prices, all these prices are going to continue to increase. There's no indication that used car prices are coming down. I mean,
Well, wait,
caveat,
And shelter.
hold on,
shelter.
wait. On the used car prices, they are coming down. They're just, you're saying not in the, if you look at the auction prices of used cars, that's based on our data. We look at the auction price of vehicles, that's definitely coming down, right?
But that's not what the BLS uses though.
Okay, that's
They
what
look
you're
at-
saying. You're saying the
yeah, they look at
BLS.
transaction prices.
Oh, so this, I mean, I've been waiting for used car prices to really roll over here in the CPI, and you're saying not in the month of July.
Not in July, but it's coming.
It's coming. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah. So I just think July is going to be, with regards to core, to Chris's point, I mean, rent is going to, it's not going to peak until later this summer. So that's going to juice the core CPI as well.
Ooh, okay.
Why do you think it'll peak later this summer?
Just given the lags between market rents and when they feed into the BLS measure of owner's equivalent rent or tenant's rent,
Okay,
it's about a year, 18 months. So that's coincides with late summer, early fall is when growth should peak.
Are you asking why it's going to peak at all, Marisa? Is that what you're
yeah,
asking?
I
Okay.
wasn't thinking of the OER component. I was more thinking of tenants rent and why would that peak in a couple months? I could see why OER would peak at some point.
Owner's equivalent rent.
Yeah,
Well, I think the market rents have on a year over year basis, sequential month to month, and on a year over year basis have peaked. I think they peaked a while ago, like
Mhm.
6 months ago or so. They're still very high. It's still,
Yeah.
I think it's still double digit, but I think it's kind of rolled over, but
Yeah.
nonetheless. But anyway,
There's
okay,
been a lot of multifamily construction over the past year or so.
there has, yeah,
Mhm.
and a lot
So that's
coming because
helping.
there's a lot in the
The
pipeline.
pipeline, yep.
So you're expecting that to take an edge off of rent growth here towards the end of the year going into next. But still, your point is in July, we got a
Okay.
big increase in CPI shelter,
Correct.
and core is going to be hot.
Mhm.
And
And then-
core was up 0.5 point, I think, in June, right? And you're saying we're going to get another 0.5 point in
Correct.
July.
Because a lot of the prices that were up in July for the core CPI are sticky, and they don't really mean revert very quickly.
Right. Okay. What about food prices? Any sense of that? I mean, everything seems to suggest that should be down too, or at
Yeah,
least
for
Right.
month over month, they've been rising around 1%. Like they've been just pretty steady,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
commodity prices have come down a lot.
right.
With diesel prices coming down, that should help take some heat off food prices as well.
Because that's like over half the cost of food is just getting it from the farm to the store shelf.
Correct.
Diesel. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what you're saying is this, given the strong jobs numbers, which are obviously too strong for the Fed's taste, lower unemployment, that's the wrong direction in the Fed's view, which should be moving north to take, obviously the prism is inflation and they want to cool off wage and price pressures. And you're saying the CPI report, it'll look good top line, but underneath the hood, the core is going to give them some agita.
Mhm.
Is that a word, agita?
Oh, yeah.
It is a word. Okay, agita. Okay. I didn't think
talking
I-
to 3 Italians here.
yeah. Oh, you all know agita. Your mom would say, "You're giving me agita."
We all have it. Yeah.
We all have agita. Okay. And we have 3 Italians. I didn't even think of that. We got the Reedies, DeAntonio. Oh my gosh, DiNatale. It just dawned on me. You guys knew. You guys
The
were
3Ds.
the 3Ds. Oh wow, cool, very cool. And then we got one Irish dude. You're Irish, aren't you, Ryan? No.
Scottish.
Oh, same difference. Scottish. I know. Okay. Oh, very, very good. That's so cool. Where were we? Oh, what's the market say, Ryan, about the Fed in September? Are they now pricing in 75 basis points?
So before the employment report, it was a 60% probability of a 75 basis point rate hike. Now, last time I checked, it was close to 70%.
Ooh, boy.
And that will go up after the CPI next week.
All right. Okay. All right. We have not changed our forecast yet, though. We're still at 50. We're going to see.
Yeah, we need to see the CPI.
We need to see the CPI.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Okay. Very good.
September 21st is a long way away still.
Yeah, a lot can happen between.
Yeah,
now
a
and
lot
then.
can happen. A lot
It's
can
not
happen.
just
We
the
get another-
CPI
A
report.
lot can happen. Yeah. And as to Dante's point, I don't think underlying job growth is 500K plus. I don't think it is. I think it's definitely south of that, probably half that. And if that's right, then that'll shine through here before the Fed meeting in September. But anyway,
I mean, I don't want to steal Dante's numbers, but the seasonal
will.
adjustment factor is pretty favorable in July, particularly for state and local government education. So usually that falls by $1 million. It didn't fall anywhere close to that. Same thing with leisure and hospitality. So
oh, you're saying the seasonals flattered this 500K gain.
a little
And
bit,
that-
yeah.
And so the seasonals are not going to do so in August. And August will be the key report for the FOMC.
Remember August always comes. in
Oh
with
yeah, August. Oh yeah, we always
Death-
get wacko,
death, yep. Death
wacko
taxes
numbers.
and a weak August employment report.
Always weak in August.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. And our thesis was that's because of the response rate to these surveys by businesses and households or
And
businesses.
the response rate in July was the lowest since 2010. They've just
No.
been consistently really low this year. So
Wow, that
that's
is
why
interesting.
we'll see when we get the annual benchmark revisions.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's play the game. The statistics game. As you recall, and people get annoyed at me for repeating the rules because we need to, because we have folks on the podcast that do not play by the rules unless you articulate them every single time. And the rules are each of us gives a statistic. The rest of us try to figure out that statistic through questioning and deductive reasoning and clues. The best statistic is one that's not so easy that we all get it quickly. Not we don't want that's too hard that we never get it. And it needs to be or should be, except I can break this rule every once in a while, but it should be the case that it's this last week or so, or relevant to the topic at hand, which is obviously the labor market. Okay, with that, I think we should go with Dante first because I really want to know what these three reasons are. So let's go back to Dante. Dante, what's your statistic of the week?
349,000.
Oh, I know what that is.
Oh,
Is it negative?
difference.
No, not negative.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so you don't know what it is?
No,
Well,
never mind. I thought it was. I thought it had to be
Well, what's
negative.
negative 349?
That was the change in non-seasonally adjusted employment in July.
Oh,
No,
It
this is
was?
the
No, that's what the number. Obviously, negative 300 and something thousand was the change in non-seasonally adjusted employment in July.
hold on. So what? So in
Really?
July, not seasonally adjusted employment fell 349,000?
Mhm.
Oh,
July's
really?
Usually falls a lot more.
Because of schools.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
see. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Schools let out. Okay, got it.
Chris, do you know what it is?
yeah, this
Wait.
is the difference between the payroll and the household survey.
Should have went with the harder version, the averaged. Yeah, so it's the difference between the establishment survey and household survey employment.
Average of 350.
Well,
Yeah. So over the last.
oh wait. Well, why, Chris? How did you know that? I mean, that's
That's
like
a
a
good
weird. That's a weird statistic to
Collusion.
know. Huh?
This collusion.
We were
It's called collusion.
we were preparing for a webinar this week, and I pulled this up.
there you
Oh,
go.
that's right.
So
because
it was in my
you
mind.
had
So
a
I looked it
chart.
up. I was thinking of it as a statistic, but
Hmm.
Oh, you had a chart with employment versus payroll versus household employment. All right.
yeah.
Okay, so Dante, why'd you pick that?
So the number I really wanted to use over the last 4 months, the average change in household employment is negative 42,000, right? So it's down on average over the last 4 months. The gap between payroll employment and household employment is big over the last 4 months, and I'm not a big proponent of household survey employment. No offense to Marisa's former career,
But no, that's exactly what you.
but
You're
and-
definitely dissing Marisa.
None
What are you
take-
talking
none-
about?
no
You're
offense
dissing Marisa,
taken.
and then he says, "I'm not dissing Marisa."
and
What's that all
over 1, 2, 3 months, we see these gaps form all the time, and usually they revert back. But now we're getting to that point where it's starting to look like maybe it's something where at 4 months where you've got payroll survey employment's over 400,000 average over the last 4 months, and you've got household survey employment, which is negative over the last 4 months, certainly makes me think that there's some weakness there in the payroll survey that we're not seeing. Again, over the next couple of months, that could flip and everything could look fine over the course of the year. But it's getting to that sort of time horizon where I start to think about it a little bit more in terms of a potential issue.
So that was one of your reasons for thinking the job numbers, the report isn't quite as strong as it appears. I look at household employment, which is the survey of households. That's been showing much, much weaker, even declines in employment in recent months compared to this booming gains in the payroll survey.
Right. And Ryan, I'm assuming Ryan's going to tell me I should look at the adjusted concept for household employment, which
that was up 610,000.
Is better, right, this month, but the average over the last 4 months is still much weaker. It's only like 180K average over the last 4 months. So it's still less than half the payroll.
You gotta love the camaraderie here. I mean, Dante knew exactly what Ryan was going to go after him on. Like he immediately knew, even before Ryan said anything.
Couldn't get the number out.
Yeah, I knew you were coming. I knew you were going to come at me with it. Yeah, this month it was strong, but yeah, over the last 4, it's still much weaker, even if you adjust.
This is a tight group. This is really a tight group. I mean, we can read each other's minds. He knew he had to get it out quick because he knew Ryan was going to pounce on him.
I knew he was just waiting. I could see him just waiting to throw that in my face.
A coiled spring over there. Yeah, very cool.
So that was the one reason. Ryan touched on the other 2 reasons, right? The response rate is still historically low, and 2022 on average is looking like it's going to be terrible. 2021 had set a record for low response rates. 2022 is trending even lower than that in terms of average response rates on the first print estimates. And then the seasonals are.
Can you explain that just for the listener out there? These are surveys, surveys of businesses, surveys of households, and of course it's not compulsory. It's not like you have to fill it out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you're saying that the percent of businesses that are responding to the BLS survey is way down compared to historical norms.
Right. For July, I think this was the weakest July since 2008. And, even if you look on average across the whole year, response rates have been down in 2021 and even further down in 2022. They're the weakest in, 15 years probably.
What's going on, do you think? Why?
I assume some of it is survey fatigue. I feel like over the last few years, there's been just an increased number of surveys in general. And I think some of it is just, exhaustion of filling out surveys and more important things to do in terms of business finances and business prospects than answering a survey about employment.
I got fatigue. Definitely got fatigue.
Yeah.
I filled out so many surveys. Many Moody's surveys.
Although much of this is automated now.
That's
I
true.
mean,
that's
it's pretty rare that someone at a company is filling out a survey. Most of the payroll survey is a automated kind of thing. So it could be, maybe it's the working from home thing. Maybe like with all of this disruption, going down.
Marisa's point.
I mean, just there's disruption in the way business has been transacted, right, over the past, and things have happened over the past couple of years. So maybe it's that, maybe it's business formations. Well, we get the benchmark preliminary next month, right? So we'll find out if this response rate issue, how big of an issue it's been.
That's when the BLS benchmarks the survey-based information to the actual counts of employment based on unemployment
UI claims. Yeah.
So we get a full view of what's going on in the labor market. This is their initial.
It's a preliminary.
They don't actually incorporate it until January, I believe.
Right.
Usually the preliminary is very close to the final.
Yeah. I'm curious. So that's 2. What's the third reason?
The third was seasonal adjustment, which Ryan touched on. For July, it's the big factor, right? Outside of January, July has the biggest seasonal adjustment factor of any other month. And pre-pandemic, that adjustment was about 1.2 million on average up. So July employment unadjusted is typically way down. Seasonal adjustment would lift it by about 1.2 million. Pre-pandemic, in 2020 and 2021, that got cut to about 750K. And this year, in 2022, that bounced back up over 900,000, the adjustment. So, if the adjustment had stayed where it was the last 2 years, this number would have been in line with the average over the last 2 months. It would have been sub 400,000. but the seasonal adjustment bounced back up by 150K. So that's providing some support. And I think it's hard to know what is the right number, right? Is the seasonal adjustment, should it be more like 2020 and 2021, or should we be moving back towards 2018, 2019? I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it adds uncertainty to that number.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's pretty convincing. So you're saying strong report, but probably there's less there than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's certainly not a negative in any way. I think
No.
It's probably more like trend growth over the last 3 months than it is any sort of acceleration in job growth.
Yeah. Which trend would be, I think if you take a 3-month moving average, the monthly job gain is like 4. Hope this isn't anyone's statistic. I think it's like 430, 435, something like that. Yeah. That's still strong, over 100K, but okay. Okay, very good. And Cris deserves plaudits, if not a cowbell, because he nailed that pretty quickly. And he's so, modest. He didn't even. If I had done that, you would have definitely known that I had done that.
Where is the cowbell?
Chris, do you have one?
We all have cowbells. Here's my cowbell.
But yet no one gave Cris a ring.
Well,
it happened last week too, Marisa.
I heard.
So it's okay.
Did it happen?
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You got it last week too. Yeah. Okay. Marisa, you're up. Let's go to you.
6.7%.
Is that U6?
You got it.
Now, okay, wait. That is a cowbell.
So now it's a cowbell.
Look at the excitement on his face. He almost jumped out of his chair.
I love the game. I love it when
I love this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That was
Ryan,
pretty
were you
easy.
impressed?
I was impressed.
He was impressed. Okay. U6. What's U6?
Obviously, it was pretty easy, but I picked it because
fair enough.
6 is the broadest measure from the household survey that we have of labor underutilization. So it includes the traditional unemployment rate, includes all the people that are counted as officially unemployed, but it also counts people that are working part-time for economic reasons, which means they don't want to be working part-time, but they have to, either because that's all they can find or because their employer cut their hours. And it also includes people that are marginally attached to the labor force, which means they're not working and they haven't looked for work in the past 4 weeks, but they looked sometime in the past year. And that includes people that are not looking for work for a variety of reasons. It could be people that are discouraged over job prospects. It could be people that are sick or have to take care of a family member. So it's kind of the biggest, the most encompassing metric of labor market underutilization. And I picked it because 6.7% in July is the lowest that has been since December of 1969.
Oh, really?
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Oh, okay. Wow. So unemployment 3.5 is back to pre-pandemic. 6.7 is the lowest.
Is even lower than that. Yeah. When you add in all those other groups.
That's very cool.
Well, 3.5 is still among the lowest in 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, and it's close, right? Like 6.7%, it's been like 6.8% or something before. But it is the lowest since 1969.
That's another one of those glass half full, glass half empty kind of things. I mean, like I'm going, that sounds great. Then they go, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of had the question when we were talking about the Fed, and obviously the Fed is keyed in on inflation, but in terms of how they're measuring what full employment is, can you talk a little bit about what you think they're looking at? Because if we're saying that we don't think the participation rate is going to get back to where it was, right, because of demographics, then how are they measuring what full employment is?
Well, Ryan's got his favorite one. What's that? And I know the
prime age.
Yeah.
Prime age.
Pop.
Employment to population ratio.
And that
from
rose
25 to 50. It was, what was it?
80%.
It was on the nose.
So
Yeah.
that's
from
what
79.8% in June.
But 80% is, that's a reasonable full employment. It's not above full employment. It's not below full employment. It feels like that's exactly on full employment,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you look at that and you don't go into high alert. The economy's overheating
No,
kind
not
of
yet.
mode. Yeah. But it feels like it's been hovering around 80%, the employment to
Mhm.
population ratio for 6 months now or something.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But 6-7, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Cris, you're up.
All right, I'll reverse Marisa, 7.6 million.
All right, so
Why is that a reverse?
Oh, she was 6.7. This is 7.6.
Oh, okay. Did
Okay,
anyone
but
else
this
get
is
That's how my
that?
mind
million.
works.
Yeah.
This is
7.6 million, 4.8% is related to that. To give
is
you
this
a
coming
hint.
from the jolts?
Nope. Came out today.
7.6 million. And what was the percentage?
4.8%.
4.8%.
Is this one of the blemishes you had to find?
I had to dig.
Yeah.
pretty
Was this
deep.
in the household survey?
Demographic
Or the-
cuts that
What's that?
Was that Dante?
deep down in the demographic cuts of the household survey. Is that where we are here?
It's in the household survey. Yes.
Does that
Okay.
deal with teenagers?
Nope.
And this is a blemish. This is something
Well, it's
sort of a blemish.
kind of sort. I mean, it's not a
Yeah, big deal.
big deal or a detractor, if you will, but put some color on the payroll survey.
Oh, on the payroll survey.
Well, but it's from the household survey, but
Okay.
this figure.
Is it part-time, full-time kind of thing?
No, you're getting closer though.
Working for
Uh,
economic reasons?
No, you're getting farther.
Oh, I know what it is.
You got
It's
it?
multiple job hold.
You
or
got it.
people holding.
Oh, good job.
Very good.
That is
very
that
good.
is definitely cowboy
Thank you.
cowbell
Cowbell
worthy.
worthy.
That was a tough one.
Yeah, cowbell worthy.
So why'd you pick
Yes.
that?
What's that?
So why did you pick that?
Yeah, so it's up. So 7.6 million people have multiple jobs versus 7.5 last month. So about 100K. All right. So it's increasing. It is still below what it was prior to the pandemic. Right. So people are taking more jobs, right? Individuals are taking more jobs, but it's not quite at the level either in number or percentage terms as we had pre-pandemic. So do expect this to continue. Given all that demand that's out there, and if finances are tight, especially for folks at the lower end of the distribution, you can expect them to be picking up more jobs. So again, puts a little spin on the payroll number,
Yeah.
which of course counts the jobs versus households, which are counting people.
All right, good one. That was a good one.
Mhm.
And good job, Marisa. Okay. And Ryan, you're up.
206,000.
206,000. Was that in today's jobs report?
No comment. If I
Whoa.
answer that question, you'll get it.
Really? That seemed
Mhm.
like a pretty innocuous question.
No, it
Oh,
wasn't.
because the answer is
okay.
no.
The
Therefore,
answer is
UI
no.
claims.
the answer is no. Is that something related to UI claims?
It is.
Oh,
Is that
Unadjusted.
seasonally
Yep.
unadjusted UI
Yeah,
claim?
Dante got it.
Oh, what do you mean Dante got that?
He beat you.
He did?
Yeah. Yep.
I didn't hear him.
this one's for you, Dante.
Oh, geez.
I didn't hear him.
You didn't
That
hear
was
him because you were
rude.
talking.
My more normal state of affairs. Yeah. Okay. Actually, this is really important.
Mhm.
And I forgot to bring it up, but go ahead, fire away. This is really, really, really interesting.
So initial claims, which counts the people filing for unemployment insurance benefits, have been ticking up on a seasonally adjusted basis throughout July. And I think they were close to 260,000 last week. But July, you have auto retooling. So I thought, all right, maybe the timing of the when they normally switch over models is throwing off UI claims. But when you look at UI benefits unadjusted for seasonal fluctuations, they're moving sideways. So they're exactly where they were during the June payroll reference period. So that increase kind of factored into the forecast for weaker job growth. But if I had looked at this sooner, I would realize that UI benefits really hadn't ticked up. And in today's employment data, you can look at the labor force flows, and the number of people going from employed to unemployed did not increase. So, the increase in UI benefits is a little bit misleading. or very
That-
misleading.
Really interesting. So we've been looking at the seasonally adjusted weekly unemployment insurance claims, which we focus on because that's a
Mhm.
kind of a real-time indicator of what's going on. That had been trending up. We were down close to a couple 100,000 in the spring. Last week it hit 260. That is kind of at the high end of the range you feel comfortable with. Anything above that, you start saying, oh, the job market's really going to start to slow here. But you're saying if you look at the seasonally unadjusted UI claims, no real increase. And did you mention Massachusetts? Did you mention?
No, I didn't. Something's quirky going on in Massachusetts because you saw a big spike in initial claims in July or the first half of July. They come back down a little bit, but they're still very elevated relative to where they were in June. So I'm not quite sure. There's been a few strikes in Massachusetts, and people that are on strike can't receive UI benefits, but it doesn't stop them from filing. Or there's the Massachusetts unemployment insurance fund is kind of running dry. They paid out billions during the pandemic. So I don't know if that, Marisa and I were talking about this. I don't think this is a factor, but I don't know. Maybe people rushed out to try to file before.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. I don't have an explanation for what's going on in Massachusetts.
Right. But I think if you take total U.S. nationwide UI claims, subtract Massachusetts, seasonally unadjusted, I think we're actually at a new low on claims for unemployment insurance.
Yep. So one state is throwing off a lot of the data.
So, I mean, your conclusion is there's been no pickup in layoffs, and layoffs are very low by any standard. So that goes back kind of counter to Dante's, the reason for it to be weaker. This suggests that the labor market's pretty booming. Yeah. Okay.
When I focus on UI is that, especially at turning points when UI benefits start going up, that means the unemployment rate is going to start going up, and then you get that vicious cycle that kicks in.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay. I'm going to give you mine.
Yep.
And this will be a segue into the last part of the conversation. $4.11.
Is that copper?
No. Copper is $4.35.
Average national gas price.
Marisa, way to go.
Wow,
Marisa.
Marisa is on fire.
He's on fire, baby. She's putting us all to shame. She's making up for that.
Making up for my lack of
bum participation rate.
Yeah, the employment report.
No, that's very good. Yeah, $4.11. That's AAA. That's as of yesterday, I believe. The all-time peak was $5 a gallon on the nose, and that was mid-June. So we're almost down a full buck. And just as a kind of point of reference, I think in a kind of a well-functioning economy with oil prices at equilibrium, which we put at $75 a barrel, something like 75 bucks a barrel, gas should be going for $3.25, $3.50. So, we're on the high side of where it should be, but that's a big deal. That's coming in very fast. And just give you a sense of how important remember going back to the consumer price index, CPI inflation is 9.1. Of that, 3.5 percentage points is directly related to these higher energy prices. And of course, that doesn't account for the indirect effects, the diesel prices on food that we talked about, or jet fuel on airline tickets, that kind of thing. So this is a big deal in terms of overall inflation. And we all know that gasoline plays an outsized role in kind of the collective psyche, how people kind of view the world inflation expectations and how they think about their own financial future fortunes. So this decline in gas prices, oil prices is a big deal. Hey, Ryan, one quick question there. You look at wholesale prices to guide where retail prices are going to be in a couple of weeks. What are wholesale prices saying?
The price that you and I are paying will get close to $4 per gallon in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, good. Here's the other thing I find fascinating. There's this old adage that gasoline prices rise like a rocket and fall like a feather. So when oil prices go up, oil companies jack up gas prices very quickly. When oil prices come back down, they don't bring down gas prices as quickly. That does not seem to be the case here. They're falling fast, right?
They're very quickly.
Yeah. So they've come down as fast as they went up. Yeah, which is interesting. Okay, and this is I think a good segue to the last part of the conversation, and that's what does it all mean for the economy and recession risks and odds of recession, that kind of thing. Now let me preface this conversation this way. I'm I'm so confused, because everything I've been looking at over the past week, over the past month, 6 weeks, makes me feel better about the economy. Today's jobs numbers make me feel, boy, the labor market's very resilient. Businesses are may look through the business cycle and keep on hiring. Yeah, we'll see slowing, but they're not going to cave here because they know that they've got a big problem filling those unfilled positions in the long run. I mentioned gasoline prices, stock prices. Stock prices, they were down 25% at one point, or pretty close, I think, from the peak back 4, 6, 8 weeks ago. We're now down, 15 to 20%, which is down, but off this incredibly high level, and doesn't feel consistent with the idea that we're going into recession. I look at the ISM surveys for the month of July. They were good. They were actually, the ISM services, non-manufacturing, that actually rose during the month.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, I look at all that and I go, wow, it feels like the economy is doing pretty well here. But here's the thing that I get confused at. The one thing that the fly in the ointment, the thing that it's a stick in my side. Any other ways of describing how I feel? You get my point, is that yield curve, the difference between 2-year, 10-year treasury yields, that is a very prescient leading indicator. It gets it right. That is
Sometimes
inverted. It's negative. What is it? Negative now?
it was minus 40 to minus 40 basis points this morning.
40 basis 0.4%. That's a hard inversion. There's no ambiguity around that. It's been inverted now for more than a month. So that would signal recession. So, okay. How are you as confused as I am, and how are you resolving that in your own mind, and where are you landing? And I'll go around the circle and get people's sense of how they're thinking about the economy, recession risk. Give me your odds of recession in the next 12 months, 24 months, and then I'll give you mine. So does that sound like a reasonable way to end the conversation? Okay. Why don't we'll begin where we started with Marisa. How are you thinking about things?
Did we start with me? I don't know. I thought we started with Dante. Well, anyway, okay.
No, hold it. Didn't you give the rundown?
Oh, you mean back then? Okay, yeah. I thought you meant the game. I thought you meant the game.
Yeah.
Oh, the game. The game.
Seems like an eternity ago.
Yeah. Right. You want to forget
actually,
the beginning? That's the issue.
I do want to forget it. Weirdly, I feel a little more optimistic than I did maybe even a month ago before the Q2 GDP came out. I mean, the job market looks better. Those ISM surveys looked a little better. Like things seemed a little better than we were expecting. The yield curve, I mean, it's not really wrong, right? So I'm kind of at 50% over the next year and a half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even odds.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Any other statistics that sway your thinking one way or the other that I did not mention?
So not really big national statistics. One thing I have been looking at is just household spending and credit, right? It looks like credit markets are tightening up a little bit. They're still pretty loose though. The household survey pulse, the Census Bureau's pulse survey, which we've mentioned a few times on the podcast. One thing that's concerning, and this just goes back to inflation, is they ask people if they're having trouble making ends meet, if they're having trouble just meeting their monthly household obligations. That was 40% of households said they're having trouble making ends meet at the end of July here. And that's the highest it's been since they started taking the survey when the pandemic started. And it was a year ago, it was 27% said they were having trouble just meeting obligations, and now it's 40. So I think inflation is really the problem here. So if we're assuming that this is peaking and it's going to be better from here on out, then that also makes me feel a bit better about the prospects of the economy.
Okay. Dante, how are you thinking about things?
I'm at 50-50 too. I think the thing if you could engineer what you'd want to happen with the labor market, maybe we want things to slow a little bit more quickly, but layoffs don't look like they're really elevated in any meaningful way. And at the same time, job openings have come down by over 1 million in the last 3 months, which is exactly what the Fed wanted to happen, right? They want some of the froth to come out of the labor market, some of those openings to go away, to take some of the heat off of wage and price pressure without layoffs inching up, right? Which is what we've seen happen now over the last few months. And so the question is, will that continue? And it feels like we're in a better place for that to continue happening over the next couple of months than we maybe were, given the strength of the jobs report. So if we can continue to see openings come in without UI claims or any other measure of layoffs starting to inch higher, I think that's where we want to be.
So you can see a path forward that does not include recession, but obviously it's a narrow path.
Yeah, it's a narrow path, but I think we need to see openings continue to come down. We need to see labor demand, pull back a little bit without layoffs flying higher. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cris, where are you?
I'm still at 60%.
60.
Haven't really budged there.
Recession odds over the next year.
Over the next year, I think we're in a good news is bad news situation.
Yeah.
The Fed is operating with a lag, and I think they're going to overshoot it here, and with higher probability that we go into recession. I'm also looking at confidence. Right, consumer confidence remains quite low. Maybe it turns around with gas prices, but I worry that that's going to wear on spending and the outlook overall. And housing, right? Housing slowing. I'm not seeing that picking up substantially anytime soon. I think that's going to be a drag on activity.
As it should be, right? That
should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's by design, right? If you're going to,
but it is a weight.
Growth.
Yeah, it is a weight, though. You put that on top of these other factors, and the recession probably goes up.
Yeah. Okay. And how much weight do you put on the yield curve inversion?
A lot.
A lot.
So the 40 basis points 10-2, that's definitely why I'm over 50. If the 10-year 3-month were to invert, it hasn't yet, but it's narrowing, then I'm going higher. That's really, for me, very precious.
That's going to invert in September.
If they go 50 basis points, it'll be close, right?
Yeah, but if they go 75.
If they go 75, yeah.
They're going to invert it.
But as we've said, there's a lot of ground to cover between now and then.
Yep. So
yeah, okay. All right. So Ryan, where are you?
I'm still at 65.
Okay.
And it's because I'm with Cris. I think the Fed's just they're going to kill something. They're going to kill inflation, or they're going to kill the economy. And I think they're going too aggressive. They're behind the curve, so they're trying to make up for lost ground. So if it goes 75 in September, and I think it's going to be too much.
Right. And how much weight do you put on the yield curve?
0. Because the yield curve is basically saying the same thing. They're saying that the Fed's going to overdo it, and they're going to have to start cutting interest rates sometime next year. I mean, Fed funds futures are already pricing in rate cuts in late 2023.
Right, but that sounds like you're putting some weight. You're saying the yield curve. You're saying if the yield curve was saying something completely, if it was positive 40 basis points, that would not change your odds at all.
No,
the yield curve is not playing a role in your thinking.
I'm a skeptic of the yield curve.
Just a coincidence.
Oh yeah.
So you're on record. You said we had hard inversion. So if we don't have a recession, if we avoid a recession, does that put less weight, or are you going to be less of a yield curve?
Oh, I have to be by definition, right?
I'm just saying.
Yeah. No. By definition. Well, I'm at 50% too, even odds. Because I can't, given these countervailing things, it's hard to land one side or the other on this. I do think, though, right? My thinking is maybe evolving here. My sense had been that if we're going to go into recession, it would be a near-term recession. Sentiment is really bad now. And if something doesn't stick to script, we go in. If people lose faith, we go into recession. Businesses cut back, they lay off, we go into recession. But maybe the recession is not near term. Maybe the recession is actually sometime a year from now. Because if you take the 2-year, 10 years yield curve the lead historically, on average, and there's a distribution, but on average is about 12 to 18 months. I think it's to be precise, 15 months on average. So, that would put the recession into end of next year, sometime in later next year. And maybe what the curve is saying is, what bond investors are saying is that the issue isn't with the economy going into recession now. Jobs are fine. Economy is resilient. The problem is it's so resilient that inflation, wage growth remains stubbornly high. Inflation remains stubbornly high. Core inflation remains stubbornly high. And the Fed ultimately has no choice but to really keep stepping on the brakes. And ultimately it breaks the economy, as you say. And it breaks not end of this year, early next, which is kind of sort of what I was thinking, but maybe it breaks end of next year. And maybe that's how you square this circle. That's how you can get all these strong numbers now, why the equity market seems to be okay now, because the equity market doesn't have that long of a horizon. And the curve is even further out, and it's saying it's, towards the end of the year. What do you think of that?
Did you see what a lot of Fed officials said this week?
No.
That a recession is avoidable. So
is avoidable.
Okay. Which means it's not avoidable.
Okay. All right. Explain that.
No, when the Fed comes out and says, "Oh, we still think we can avoid a recession," that's not going to build a lot of confidence. And it just, to me, is kind of like, you're kind of making your own bed.
Well, they couldn't possibly say,
"Oh, no,
we can't avoid a recession," right?
Oh, of course, but just usually when they say stuff like that, it's like go back to Bernanke, and he said that there's no problems in the subprime mortgage market.
Oh yeah, well, he even gave a speech, wrote it down on paper. Was yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Very good. So even odds, 60%, 65%. Okay, we got to keep that in mind. Okay, anything else you want to bring up? Anything we missed? We covered a lot of ground. I thought this was going to be a shorter podcast, but couldn't keep Dante quiet. Anything else, Dante?
Nope, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. All right. Well, very good. We're going to call this a podcast. I hope you found it of interest, and we'll be back next week. Talk to you soon.